Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, and the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check us out on Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Make sure that you click through all the way. Also, we've had some people tell us it's $3.99 on Apple. Yes, it is. They charge an extra buck there. Sign up for it on your laptop. We post the link. And again, you can go to your laptop. It'll be $2.99 a month. And this will give you access not just to inside information, host updates, 24/7 communication with other Heat fans, but also we have our new stage shows. We call them Floor Seats, and I will be writing a weekly column. So make sure you check it out. It's Off the Floor. Also check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E, prizepicks.com. Put down $5. You get 50 more to play right away. That's how Prize Picks works these days in the state of Florida and in many other states. So check it out. Play 2 to 4 players together at prizepicks.com. Use the code 5. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all banned. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. The regular season roster is set, so we wanted to go through this. We didn't have an opportunity to after Greg, myself, Alex, and Brady kind of summed up the preseason. I think we talked about directions that this could go. And so now we're here. And there wasn't anything that was particular surprise, but there were some interesting thinking that might have gone into this, and we wanted to address it. Also, there'll be an episode later today with myself and Eternal Bass where we went over his conversation with Nikola Jovic, which, by the way, I'm going to reveal it here before he does there. This is going to air first. Nikola Jovic told him he wants to lead the team in assists, which I think is interesting. Also said he wanted to lead the team in rebounds and steals. All of these are unselfish categories, which is good. But assists, if you want players to compete to lead in a category, that is the one you would want them to compete to lead in. Because even the others, rebounds, well, Hassan Whiteside, that wasn't completely selfless when he was trying to grab every rebound, nor was it completely selfless when he wanted to get every block. Nor, and we love him to death, welcome on the podcast anytime, was it completely selfless when Mario Chalmers wanted to lead the team and the league in steals. But assists, like that is a pure selfless exercise, okay? Now, sometimes there's been talk over the years that like Chris Paul would like kind of assist hunt and that kind of stuff. That can be done. But the overall idea is that if you're going for assists, it's because you're trying to make your teammates better and trying to fill a role. And so that's one of the things we talked about on that podcast. We're just going to hold it a little bit to run after this one. Greg, let's start here. Let's go with what the roster is. First thing, the roster is healthy. Let's start there, with the exception of Josh Richardson, who's close to the men. So that's a real positive coming out of training camp, and not something that was the case last year, by the way, because Caleb Martin came out of camp not healthy. If you remember the year before, I think Yurt got hurt in camp. That was somebody that they were kind of relying upon. This year, it's just Josh. They knew about Josh, and they have a possible replacement for Josh in the time being, a couple of them in Burks and Larson. And so this is not the end of the world, and Josh will be back soon. Rozier and Robinson came back healthy, continued to progress, look like themselves from a physical standpoint. Also positive. Jimmy got through camp healthy. Tyler got through camp healthy. So all of this stuff right now looks good in that regard. All right, so here is your starting lineup going into the season. Heat fans, if you've listened to us and you've been watching it all, you know, but for those who are just joining, because season starts this week, Bam Adebayo is your center. Nikola Jovic is your power forward. Jimmy Butler is your small forward. Tyler Hero is your 2 guard. Terry Rozier is your point guard. Very traditional lineup in terms of the roles, okay? Your bench. Sorry, Sean. Your bench. Duncan, this is where he drives off the road. Duncan Robinson is your primary shooter off the bench. Jaime Jaquez is your 6th man. Haywood Highsmith is your kind of do everything 3-and-D type player, more emphasis on the D than the 3. And Kevin Love at the moment is your primary backup big. Then your 10th player, if he chooses to go with 10, until Josh is healthy, maybe even after he is some mix of Alec Burks, who they picked up as a minimum contract, who has performed well in camp, kind of an extension of what we saw in the playoffs with him with the Knicks last year. He's another shooter. Pella Larson, their second-round pick, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife, who is growing in confidence. Khalil Ware, who's the one everybody wants to start right now, but is not going to, and probably won't get big-time reps as a backup big early in the season. Thomas Bryant, who's kind of your emergency big. However people feel about that, that's what he is, right? And then who am I missing in terms of the full? And then because they've cut, and we should discuss this, they cut Nasir Little even after a strong final game, which we also predicted. There was no point if they didn't see a real role for him on this team. There's really no point keeping him around, and then ultimately cutting him before January 7th anyway. So that he was released by that point. And am I missing someone who's not a two-way?
I think you've hit everyone. They're only carrying 14. I mean, they waived Nasir Little, as you mentioned. Zion Pullen was waived as well. I have the expectation that Pullen, Isaiah Stevens, who is another one that I think fans were looking closely at, and Warren Washington, all were waived. I think those guys will get funneled to Sioux Falls, maybe with the exception of Nasir Little, but maybe not. Who knows? So you had those guys those were the decisions made at the very bottom of the roster. I think some of us were campaigning for Isaiah Stevens a bit, but I understand all of the reasons why Josh Christopher, Drew Smith, why those guys got the nods over them. It's interesting that you mentioned the starting lineup being very traditional, yet Jovic is a guy who's looking to lead the team in assists. Like, that's very unconventional. So it's an interesting mix there. You nailed everyone in terms of the fact that they are healthy, and knock on wood, like, everyone's in a really good place, it seems like. So they're starting off on a much clearer foot this year. But I think that fans, like, that get in the nitty-gritty of this stuff, will be checking in Sioux Falls to see what happens with Isaiah Stevens, or if another team tries to poach him next, because I think that there is some positional value as we kind of cycle back to what everyone hates, getting back into positions, what Isaiah Stevens brings from a pure point guard perspective. And they obviously went with Drew Smith. They went with Josh Christopher. That makes sense for other reasons. But that was probably the most compelling part of the roster decisions that were made.
Yeah, and it's the most controversial for the perspective of Heat fans, and I do think that a couple of things went into this, and we'll cycle back and I'll try to get the deep dive on it over the course of the week. But a couple of things we talked about on the podcast when we were talking about the decision making process, which is one, I think Josh Christopher would get poached. I do. I think there's enough there. He's a former first round pick, and it's not like he showed any regression in terms of summer league or his performance with the Heat. I mean, he talked about his willingness to fill a role, and yet Spoelstra had him playing with the group he played with, in which he took more of a lead role. And so I think they must have seen enough in the practices when he was kind of integrated with the regulars, where they're like, okay, if we need him for a few minutes in this situation, or this guy is out, how is he going to look next to some of our better players? Because that's sort of how they make those evaluations. So it wasn't just, and I know Heat fans goes, oh, well, he popped when he was playing with the other summer leagues. That's not what ultimately was going to make this decision. It might have made them think, okay, he's going to get poached, but it's not necessarily why they would see him as a part of the future. They see, or at least the near future, they see him as somebody who can assist in terms of, okay, we need some athleticism when some of our guys are out or something along those lines, and he can provide that in short spurts.
They may
and
obviously just need buckets sometimes.
Well, that's the thing, right? I was going to say, it has the ability to score, right? So that's the thing. And I know that this is going to pivot to the Drew Smith conversation, but I want to wait to get to that, because now we're seeing that Lonnie Walker is out there. and I'm going to say this first. Okay. I like Lonnie Walker. I said they should have picked him up last year. I said the same about DSJ. Okay. Dennis Smith Jr. So these are both players that I like. I like Markelle Fultz too, who's also sitting out there. But again, all of these players have been rejected by the rest of the league. So, I mean, that's the first thing. Like, I mean, Boston had Lonnie, didn't keep Lonnie. We've seen what even Lonnie did with the Lakers, which he was productive in a short period of time. They didn't make an effort to keep him. I like Lonnie. He's a guy. I like him personally. I mean, I don't know him, but I the work he's done in the community. I'm a big Lonnie Walker fan. This is the point where we just start doing the thing where any guy who's out there who's a name, and it's like, okay, this guy fits better. And I'm looking at the situation from the Heat's perspective right now, and I could be wrong on this, but first thing, you can't sign him to a standard. Okay, that's a guaranteed. So that's not an option. So then you're talking about, okay, you got to convince the guy to take a two-way, right? I mean, that is possible. So you got to convince him to do the Caleb Martin thing. And I don't, and this is kind of what I said when people were talking about guys like on a little higher end, I guess, like a Tyus Jones or a Gary Trent Jr., that, yeah, you might like them better than the player you picked up at the minimum, but they may see a bigger role somewhere else. And like, where if they want to rebuild their value, like Tyus Jones ends up going. I mean, the Heat looked into Tyus Jones, but Tyus Jones ends up going to Phoenix, where he's going to start. I mean, with Durant and Beal and Booker, like that, he's slid into a role that they need. Like that, we talked about. They don't have a point guard now. They got two, him and Monte Morris. They kind of did the same thing with both, right? We talked about both of those guys for the Heat. Gary Trent Jr. goes to Milwaukee. They don't have a lot of shooting. They don't. I mean, and whatever people think of Hero and Robinson, Miami does have those two guys. That was even prior to Burks. So if you're Trent, you're seeing the situation. So Miami jumped on Burks right away, and that looks like it was a good signing. Okay. People can say, well, you would have rather had Trent, you would have rather had Tyus Jones. It doesn't matter. This was the player who was available at that time, and they took a player who was willing to take this role, understood the role. And the same applies now. Now we're talking on a lower level where you're asking these guys not just to take the minimum for you, but you're asking them to take two ways. And I just think there's this assumption that they're going to do that because, again, the Heat have gotten a Caleb Martin to do that before on a J. Cole recommendation. But, like, that's not this is fantasy land, in my view. Now, it doesn't mean they couldn't cycle to Lonnie Walker at some point or something like that. But even from a role perspective, Greg, like, Drew Smith has a role with this team, potentially. Yeah. Potentially.
Well, the coach definitely sees that there's a role. That all these guys have carved out. I think like that's what's interesting about this team is that there is a lot of layered in skill sets, but they're not necessarily redundant. So you can find a role for everyone in this group. And I think if you just like at face value were to swap out Drew Smith for Lonnie Walker, the name sounds better and the highlight reel probably is a little bit better. But I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that the team would be that much better. And me being one who has been critical of the Drew Smith experience, I also recognize that having a ball hawk that doesn't make mistakes, you know, we'll see if he can end up shooting enough and shooting well enough to not be a liability on that end. But I've seen them transform guys like Gabe Vincent before. So It's not unprecedented that a guy that you thought looked a little flat ends up figuring out his way. So that would really be the main name. Like if you look at the rest of the team, I don't see a world where Johnson, or I mean, Christopher, maybe we could have a discussion about, but there's no way that Johnson would lose his two-way to Lonnie Walker. And some of the things with the two ways too is that as these guys get more and more years of service, I think they become ineligible to go on two-way contract.
I need to look at it. I need to look at it more carefully because I feel like the rules changed and I haven't adjusted to it. So I will acknowledge that this could have changed in that regard. I mean, Caleb, again, I'll do that research and we'll make sure that I put that on off the floor and we'll update everybody on exactly what the rules are with two ways. But I just know that Heat fans are throwing this stuff out there because they have this sort of irrational issue with Drew Smith. And I think we fed into it a little bit because I think we liked other point guards better last year because, again, on upside play, like an RJ Hampton. But Drew Smith, first thing, okay, does the one thing Spo wants the most right now. All right. Which is he just defends. He's unselfish, he defends, and he can play around your alpha guys, like where he's not going to get in the way. And there's value to that on this team because their top two guards, okay, are not primarily defenders. I know, again, Tyler's done a really good job off the ball this preseason. I think he's gotten better on the ball, and I think that him getting stronger will help him. And Rozier has shown a lot of activity defensively. And I know even listening to the Heat broadcast, they're pushing this idea of Rozier being a plus defender, but the metrics have not shown that over the years. So where we're at is that there are times they may just need to get a guy under control. That's all. Like that's what it is. And you're looking at this roster and saying, "Oh, who else is going to do it?" Okay, Haywood. Okay, who else? And I know that the Heat fans are saying, "Well, the defense has been great in the preseason." It has. They've bought into this idea of activity and deflections and all that. But there are some times where you just have a guy who's going off. Okay, you're living. I know he's retired now, thank God, but you're living the Ish Smith experience. Okay, like there's just a player on the other team. You can't explain it, but you can't control it. Drew, give me 6 minutes. I do think that there's value to that. And I'm saying, okay, what's the value? And people are going to say, okay, you throw in Lonnie Walker and he'll get you buckets. But for him to really be able to flourish, it needs to be more of a rhythm situation. Yeah. Tyler needs to be out. Okay.
I know people is the big question.
Right. Right. And now we're already talking about on this offense, how are they with this new style going to get the shots for all of these guys? And you're bringing in, so I look at Lonnie and I'm saying, okay, he's not as good a defender as Drew. And he's not as good a shooter as Burks. And there's a comfort level between Spo and Josh. So, and then there's the desire to get minutes for Larson. And so I'm just saying, like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, you're going to bring in a guy who's not going to play and really needs those minutes to score to be able to enhance his own value to other teams. I just don't see it. And and again, it doesn't mean I dislike Lonnie Walker. I think they needed him last year. I think they needed that. But now, again, you've drafted Larson. You've brought in Burks, right? You have Rozier. These are all players that were not in the mix last year. I mean, Patty Mills and DeLon Wright. Would I have rather had him than Patty Mills? Yes, but that's not what we're talking about right now. So that's kind of where I'm at. All right, on the other side of this, I want to get to some more stuff with you about sort of this roster flexibility and which direction they go, because I think that the cap mechanics of this are interesting as they go forward. Before we do, I want to mention a great sponsor, the 5 Reasons Sports Network. That's Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. That's WCUFL.com, your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. They can bring you full circle when you have some kind of an issue in your place, leaks in your home, in your business. We know obviously about the flooding, the hurricanes. I mean, seriously, I live in downtown Lauderdale, man. It's like the storm hadn't even come through here, and like my car was covered with 3 feet of puddles. Like you have to take this stuff seriously if it happens in your home. So check it out, Water Cleanup of Florida, based in Boca Raton, service the entire Tri-County area. Also, our friend Michael, he's in our fantasy basketball league here. So Greg and I actually have to do a little prep. We haven't done anything. It's not like we followed the league for the last 6 months, so I think we're probably going to struggle. Check it out, Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
We do need to discuss that, by the way. Like, they changed the whole rules. Like, I feel like the Heat. Like, we went into this last year with like, okay, this is what it is. We've got keepers. We're dumping players to try to bring in cheap talent, right? We're doing salary cap. We're doing our Andy Ellisberg thing. You and I I seriously beat myself up. I can, you can lose thousands in the stock market, but us not getting out Sengun because I wouldn't spend an extra $1 like that. Literally, that's the way fantasy sports work, isn't it? It's like that. That's literally the most important thing of your day when you make a decision like that and you start the wrong guy or whatever. And then they changed the whole rules. They just said we're starting over. No auction, no nothing, straight draft. Like, what is that? And I feel like the Heat, where like they gave Tyler those unlikely to be earned incentives, and then they ended up hitting on the apron. Like, that's just not fair. So anyway, I will bring Andy in for the draft. Well, I don't need to, I guess. We don't have a salary cap, right? It's unlimited spend.
You're right. 5th pick. We'll see how we go.
It's like the Chef Trilly version of fantasy basketball. It's like, that's what we're doing tonight. It's just we love you. We love you, Austin. But it's just that's what it is. Anyway, so the cap mechanics of this for the Heat, Like, where are they?
They're about
Up
$1
against Texas.
million away from the apron, second apron or so. And I'm rounding, so maybe it's 1.2, 1.5. They're in that ballpark, but essentially they're in a spot where they can't really take on a ton of guaranteed money at this point in time. And that's why I think they're not carrying a full roster. And while they'll lean into your two-way guys, we've seen this movie before. And eventually, once they get to a part of the season where they can add a prorated amount per day, and I'm not going to get into the real nitty gritty of that, but essentially when each day of service allows them to stay below the second apron, but convert someone from a two-way to a regular standard contract, I believe they'll do that. We'll see which guy they choose to do that with, or if it's another player elsewhere that comes in for that prorated minimum. But right now, I think the roster is really set primarily because the financial aspect almost because of even a trade right now, Ethan, they would have to almost do it dollar for dollar. Like they'd have to make it work. They don't have the ability to take on a little extra, even though that may work within the parameters of a trade. So I would expect this to be the roster for the near future, just by sheer cap mechanics. That's kind of where we're at with this team. They've boxed themselves in as close to the apron as you can get without going over. And that's, you don't want to go over. So they're in position to stay that way all season.
Yeah, I mean the Knicks have too. The Knicks use some tricks basically, and which are legal within the rules. They found some loopholes and some things along those lines, and they were able to make the additions that they did. And so much of this, it's funny because so much of the game now is accounting, and it's just it's such a big part of everything. And I'm glad that they have a salary cap because I think what happened in baseball was really damaging. It's come back a little bit, but I mean, we're probably going to end up with a Yankees Dodgers World Series, so it's which is great for ratings, but it's not ideal when Otani makes more than what the Marlins players will for the next 25 years combined. So I do think that the fact that they have some kind of a cap and the fact that that at least they protect their players, unlike the NFL where it's not a real cap, and there is the guaranteed money and all that, but it is an accounting exercise. I was it's funny because I was playing took my daughter to the basketball court the other day and having her shoot not full free throws, of course, because she's 10 and it's a 10-foot rim, but we moved back just a little bit and I'm like, keep your percentages. You're 6 of 11. What are you shooting? And she said, well, better than Jimmy. I said, okay, well, 54.5%. And then I'm like, but I want to ask her, okay, well, how do I fit your contract under the salary cap, which I realized in real life I never will be able to do. But that is really the math lesson that we should be treating the kids these days. It's not the percentage or the points per game or anything like that. It's like, okay, what your third year non-guaranteed contract, how will that count? And Terry Rozier's 1.7 million that he earns additionally if he plays 70 games and they make the second round of the playoffs. That's where we're at, Greg. That's basketball. That's why they need to bring back the auction league.
Don't you think it's fun that there's probably a large percentage of people out there that watch Miami Heat basketball that completely do not buy into any of that? They stay oblivious to it, and they're probably, when we talk about ignorance is bliss, I don't mean ignorance as in stupid. I mean ignorance as in they're ignoring that, and they're probably having a much more peaceful experience about basketball.
They're the people who don't listen to us, and it's like I want to grab those people for our audience, but I also want to sort of grab them around the throat because it's kind of like I see them on the Heat's IG page. The Heat's IG page, by the way, is the disaster page. Now it used to be Heat Reddit and Heat Facebook. Heat Twitter is refined compared to this. And by the way, Off the Floor is way beyond that. Okay, so join us on Off the Floor for $2.99 a month. Heat Reddit used to be the worst. Okay, and Heat Facebook, but now it's like the Heat IG where they could post anything. Play Where more. Play Where more. Why isn't he playing where? Why isn't he playing where? Why did they sign Drew Smith? Why? And then it's like, why don't they just go sign Steph Curry? Like this is, and again, even for people who follow the team, ignorance is bliss. We unfortunately have to bring the reality back to it sometimes, and it's not quite as much fun. Doesn't mean we're right about everything. We're just trying to present to you the options. And to finish this where we started, the hissy fit about Drew Smith is just It's beyond ridiculous at this point. It just
sorry
is. Like,
if I contributed to it because I
did
I've seen the
too.
light. I get it now.
I did too, but like, if their season, okay, or their future is going to be determined by this decision to keep a pretty good defender, who's come back from an ACL injury and shown, some mettle in doing so, if that is going to be the deciding factor for this thing, like, what are we talking about? Like, Jimmy needs to be in a good frame of mind. Tyler needs to stay healthy. Bam needs to progress. End of story. The rest of this is us filling podcast time. Oh yeah, him too. All right, thank you. Oh, and hockey. Yeah, well, you know what you know what I mean. All that stuff. All right, thank you, Greg. We appreciate it. I'll have that episode with Eternal about Jovic coming up. Also, expecting to hear from Nate Duncan. Like, familiar with him. He has his own podcast. He's going to join us at some point this week, and we have a couple more potential special guests. But we'll let you know as we get ready for Wednesday. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.